So that's fresh to that.
I didn't know this story. I grew up, I went to public school. I grew up with Anne Frank, this story of the liberation, sort of, I thought America saved the day and liberated Auschwitz, which is a facet of how things ended. And I knew a little, but I didn't know. And I came across the story of a young girl who dug herself into a ditch and was blowing up a Nazi train with a grenade. And I thought, oh, this is Joan of Arc. I want to make a movie about her. And then I learned there were 25,000 of them, Joan of Arcs, in the forest of Eastern Europe and Belarus and Ukraine, Lithuania, and this whole region alone. And I knew I needed to tell their story. I didn't know it. And, I thought it was just the story of resistance, but what I came through to learn was it was actually a story about how impossibly difficult it would have been to resist, and sort of began to really understand how I had inherited the history through the lens of the Nazis. And then the pervasive tropes of what that was had become part of my understanding of what happened to the Jewish people and the gay people and the people with disabilities and the gypsies during the Holocaust. But really, and everyone else who was slaughtered and murdered for no good reason other than standing up. And it became clear to me that it was actually a much more human story about collective. It just fell into all the things I've been doing for 20 years as a filmmaker, as an art activist. It became about how one finds their way to resist, and it actually is through love and compassion and commitment to seeing the world live through something. And so I kind of, at each turn, I began to understand that more and more. And I'm sort of always overwhelmed at the tragedy of the Holocaust, and I love the part of the film where I was able to include Michael's sort of conflicts and struggles with faith in God, in that, that's my struggle when I think about the Holocaust or any horrible thing that happens in the world. And then all the little miracles along the way where he says, well, I don't believe in you, but now you've brought a miracle to me. And it's just such a beautiful human story, and I just kept wanting to tell it more and more every time I did a little more. And so you're welcome.
And how did you find the individuals that you interviewed for this documentary?
I like to tell this story. So Michael Stoll, who's in the film, I tried to interview him for 5 years, actually. I call him, hi, I'd like to interview you. He said, no, thank you. I call back, I lowered my voice, I used to raise it. I asked again, he said, no, thank you. And then finally, I met Robert Bilski, who is the son of Tevye Bilski of the Bilski Brigade. And he said, oh, try him again and tell him Robert sent you. I said, okay. So I called again, and he said, oh, Robert, how is he? Now, this is 5 years later, and Michael now is approaching 90-something at this point. And he says, oh, and then again, the conversation, why don't you come and have dinner with me? And I thought, oh, thank goodness. So finally, I go, I have dinner, we have Shabbat, we break bread. And he says, okay, you can interview me. Okay, so this is the story, I think. So now, bounce forward 7 years, and we're at, after COVID, we just, if it's over-ish, we had an incredible screening at the Mehewi Theater in the Berkshires, and Michael Stoll was actually still with us, the one partisan who is. And Michael was there, and we had this booming, beautiful, palpable standing ovation for him. And we're on the stage afterwards, and we're doing a general talk back, and I say to him, let me tell you a story. And so I start to tell him this story about how it was me that kept calling for 5 years, and Michael, and this is how it happened, and finally Robert gave me permission, and he said, no, it wasn't Robert. I wasn't ready. Now 97 years old. So do I find them? Do they find me?
Oh, sorry.
I don't know how to answer that exactly. I think it's kind of magical. I mean, people came, and I interviewed almost 3 dozen people, who were all collectively represented in the body of the film. You know, Michael's struggle with God, as I mentioned, or the beautiful story about virginity, or, you know, abortion, or all the stories represent the collective that I chose to include in the film. I mean, and even leaving one's fellow partisans behind, and the struggle of that. I mean, Ava, who was in the ghetto, and who was part of the underground, and whose brother was a partisan, has a story that ties into that struggle.
I'm so pleased to see all of you here. And I've seen the film a few times over the many years, but I still keep on proud and being so grateful to Julia to direct the monument to my brother John, who was a part and the skill. Yeah, it's an enormous privilege to know Julia, to see the film, and to participate in the film. For all of us who want to help her bring it to the world. We need every high school kid, we need everybody to know that the Jews didn't walk into Auschwitz because they were herded on, and that's all the picture we see of Second World War. No, there were many, many young people and old people who tried to fight, who did fight, who contributed to the success of the Allies. And I remember as a little girl at the Voice of America, Radio Free Europe, we had the hidden radios, and when we heard ta-ta-ta-ta, Beethoven's Fifth was the thing. Now you hear the news of the advance of the Allies. And we need to tell this story. Julia told the story. Now it is up to us to spread it around the world so that it should never.
That's for sure.
Can you tell us a little bit about your brother?
John was 7 years older than I, and I had his brother. I was such a pest.
He was 93.
To be with him. And
You were never a pest.
I say that. But you were always good at it. And he would, he had a printing press and printed all the news about the war, what's happening outside and against the Nazis, and trying Hungarians for an uprising, just like we did in Warsaw. And at times he would take me along at night to figure out how to distribute leaflets. I felt very much part of the life of this then 20-year-old. He was 21 when he was killed, and he was on his way over to Tito's Yugoslavia. That was really the hub of the partisan movement. And he and 4 others with him. He escaped and was close to the border. When it was sort of like a farmhouse with a front and the back. And he told his 4 companions as they heard the dog barking and shooting, you just go, I will cover for you. I heard this story from the 4 survivors when I was 15, and we waited for John to come home. Remember that? So in so many ways, this magnificent film is a tribute, is a memorial to my brother John. And I can never thank Julia enough for making this happen.
It was a powerful film. Terrible, terrible scenario.
Julie, why do you think that these stories aren't told more?
When, so it was an interesting piece of my learning. You know, I would ask people about that, and I think I see all these cameras, and I'm sure with all the tears on my face, this is great. So, you know, the story of the Holocaust is not the story of the partisans. The story of the Holocaust is it's over 6 million, 12 million people were murdered. and 6 million of them, I mean, not counting the soldiers, were the Jewish people, right? And so this is the story of the Holocaust, is the genocide. And I think that many of the partisans, many of the people who lived and fought from the forest understood that. And so the story of resistance is complex. And we can see that now in this film, and I think we're ready to kind of take that in at each turn. Like, sort of, oh, that's kind of what we were seeing. You know, we were seeing something different than maybe we perceived. But I think it was very important, and I believe because it was expressed to me by the partisans themselves when I asked that question, not because it's an opinion that I've come to, is that they really felt that that was the story of the Holocaust. But through this story, I think we understand that story even better. You know, it's sort of through this portal of those that did and could live through it to tell their story, we understand that. I think that there's another layer which I learned, which was, you know, by the time people were able to escape, there's actually an underground railroad through Europe. I mean, it wasn't like the war is over and people could go home. As you saw, there was no home to go home to. And nobody had any papers, they didn't have anything in their pockets, so, and people weren't letting people, I mean, I know you can speak to this, you couldn't go through borders, I mean, how could you go from here to there? So then there was a whole nother hint about my next film. There's a whole other chapter about what happens now, like, and the partisans and other sort of renegades built an underground railroad to kind of get people out in tandem with the DP camps. Okay, so now I'm telling you all this because you bounce forward, and guess what's happening in the United States? We're in the McCarthy era, give or take, the rise of communism. The partisans were in the forest fighting with the Russians and the Soviets. And as they'd all experienced, you know, neighbors aren't so friendly all the time, and so it was much safer to just be a survivor. I mean, you weren't necessarily going to come forward and sort of tell that piece of your story if you were in the United States, for sure. And I do know that in Israel, because I've been told that this is it's a different collective understanding of the Holocaust and the resistance. But, you know, I speak and I created this film from the lens through which, I'm sorry, I want to talk to you, but actually I want to talk to you too. So I'm going to pivot. Created the film through the lens of the partisans who lived it, and through the lens of my own explorations and queries to better understand the history. So that's sort of how I think it's known or not known. I think it was timid. So may I turn to you? I'm so glad that you're here, and it means so much to us, and maybe some of you know, but this has been so important for me to be able to bring the film to the broadest audiences, because I think we're at a moment in time that's critical, and it's powerful to know that maybe Four Winters can help and play a role in what's happening today. And as a journalist and as a publisher and editor-in-chief of New Amsterdam, congratulations, brilliant. I would love to hear your thoughts about this film, and tell us, what would you like to tell us?
Well, you know, my mother is in the audience as well, in the back.
Hi, Mom.
She was born in 1934 in Prague, Czechoslovakia. And we were very lucky because she and 22 members of her family were able to get out in 1939. They were able to all get on the ship out of Le Havre, France. But there were several members that, of course, were not able to get out. And when we were talking about the tanks, the Russian tanks, it reminded me of one of my aunts, who was a great aunt, who ended up being a nurse. She was a nurse in terrorism. And she was on a train. They were sending all of the prisoners from terrorism to extermination camps, whether the war was about to be over. They were trying to get rid of the last bullets that were in the camps, especially terrorism, since it was a model camp. And the train tracks got bombed, and So, so she was in one of those trains, and the Russians, told me they were free, and she wanted to get back to Prague. And of course, she was not very close to that, but the Russian tank commander let her ride on the top of the tank to the outskirts of Prague. And she says that he gave her some perfume, and she put some perfume on her, and she rode on the top of this tank to the outskirts of Prague. And when she got to the outskirts of Prague, they said, "We can't go any further, we can't go into Prague." And she flagged down a car that had a red cross on the side of it, and the driver said, "Guard this package in the back with your life." And she said, "Okay." And it was a carton of wine. Got into Prague, and he gave her a bottle, and we drank. We got drunk, and that was her story of liberation. She ended up marrying a communist actor, and I remember visiting her when I was probably about, I think I was 9 the first time I went to Prague to visit her, and seeing what life was like under the Iron Curtain. And Czechoslovakia. And if I talk to Eva about that, she will say, "No, it was not Czechoslovakia. It was I'm Hungarian, not Czech." She always corrects me. But being Black and Jewish, especially in this day and age, is very interesting. Because our histories, our struggles are so similar yet so different. Our fights have intertwined, yet so often we so misunderstand each other, and so often we're pitted against one another, and it is terrifying, the hate that has been created. And so much of it has been created, unfortunately, by media. And so much more has been created by people actually not knowing one another. And a lot of it has to do with ignorance. And I think that is one of the saddest states of this of all. And films like this can change the world. And I think that is so important.
So we can bring this further into the conversation. I want to thank you. After the call-in by Michael Imperioli, the New Amsterdam placed our trailer on your online newspaper, and it said, I think it said, "Truth, don't look away," or something to that effect, which was really very significant and super important to sort of stand in line with not Holocaust denial, sort of, so to put that forward, and that was such an important moment and very brave, and thank you. This film will have a place and an ongoing role in that dialogue, and I think because it's so personal, there's no scholars, not the scholars, I always say this, deeply informed this film. Without the deep scholarship of so many, I would not have been able to create this film. But I was so keenly aware that this was the last telling of the story. And I felt that because of all the complexities and misunderstanding, to have those that lived the history just to be candid and raw and so truthful about their journey, it's such a pivotal way to really enter the broader conversation because you're just with them.
Well, I mean, the testimonies that you've done from the individuals were so amazing. All of history is the stories of individuals. And it's so unfortunate that we don't have more of the stories of the partisans. because they are such an important part of the story.
It's the oldest tradition, and I tried to bring that forward of the passing down oral histories. And that's really what I wanted to do here. You know, if you're sitting in the huddle and the elders are sharing their stories. Oh,
Thank you. You know, we have to close here now, and we really want as many questions from all of you, if you want to ask.